Have you ever trusted something so deeply, only to feel, deep in your bones, that something just isn't right? Michael Carter knew that feeling better than anyone. As the founder and CEO of Carter's Diner, a beloved chain of restaurants known for its slogan, "Where every customer is family," Michael had built everything from scratch, starting in the tiniest kitchen in town. What began as a humble corner eatery had grown into a culinary icon, with 4 thriving locations spread across the city. On paper, everything still looked perfect. The monthly revenue reports kept coming in, steady as ever. Customers flowed in and out. Tables were always filled with delicious meals and lively conversations. But beneath those promising numbers, something was quietly gnawing away at the peace. Michael noticed an inexplicable decline in net profits. Operating costs were skyrocketing, even though sales hadn't dropped. Worse yet, the staff turnover rate at his very first location, the birthplace of his proudest achievements, had reached an alarming high. What was really happening inside the kitchen he once knew like the back of his hand. Never one to sit idly in the face of doubt, Michael decided to investigate the matter himself. No regional managers, no boardroom meetings. It would be him, the man who knew every brick and every corner of Carter's Diner, stepping in with the eyes of an outsider. He pulled a worn baseball cap low over his brow, threw on a faded shirt, and let 3 days of stubble shadow his face. The image of a successful entrepreneur was now replaced by the humble appearance of an ordinary, middle-aged man. Michael pushed open the door to the diner. The familiar jingle of the door chime rang out like a warm echo from the past. But what sent a chill down his spine wasn't the familiarity, it was the strange indifference from the staff behind the counter. No one looked up. No one greeted him the way they used to welcome guests, with bright, genuine smiles. The kitchen fires still blazed. The clatter of knives and chopping boards filled the air, and diners chatted softly over their meals. On the surface, everything seemed normal, but an unexplainable chill crept through the atmosphere, like a winter draft sneaking in through a door left ajar. The smiles here had hardened into stiff, hollow masks. Eyes darted away, movements seemed forced, as if something was being concealed beneath the surface. Michael chose a discreet seat at the far end of the counter, a spot where he could quietly observe everything unfolding in the restaurant. He ordered a black coffee, keeping his demeanor as unassuming as any ordinary customer. But inside, the fire of suspicion burned fiercely. What had turned Carter's Diner, once warm like a family, into such a cold, unwelcoming place? Was there a dark secret hidden right at the heart of the place he had trusted with all his soul? The answers were waiting, and for the first time in many years, Michael Carter was ready to embark on a journey he never imagined he'd have to take, to uncover the truth inside his very own empire. In every crowd, there is always one person you overlook until you realize they are the quiet hero of the story. Sitting in the corner of the diner, Michael's eyes were immediately drawn to someone who, to most people, would have seemed like nothing more than part of the restaurant's dull background. An old man, quietly stationed behind the dishwashing sink, his sinewy hands submerged in steaming hot water, each slippery plate sliding through his aging fingers. Henry. The name was clearly visible on the small, worn-out name tag pinned hastily to the faded pocket of his shirt. A simple name for a simple man. Yet there was something about him that Michael simply couldn't look away from. Henry wasn't just working. He seemed to move in perfect harmony with the rhythms of the kitchen. Though his back had stooped with age and arthritis gnawed at his joints daily, he moved as if the weight of time had never touched him. Every plate was scrubbed spotless, every pot polished until not a trace of grime remained. Each motion meticulous and deliberate, as if he wasn't just cleaning dishes, but memories, pride, and the remaining fragments of his life. Michael watched in silence, a strange feeling stirring inside him. Henry worked with a dedication that many half his age, or even a third of his age, might never possess. No one asked him to do so much. No one pushed him. But it was clear that Henry chose to work this way. Then a moment unfolded before Michael's eyes that made his chest tighten. A young mother stood at the checkout counter, her two small children clinging to her dress, their wide, anxious eyes darting to her nearly empty wallet. Her voice faltered, barely a whisper, yet just loud enough for Michael to hear. "I'm sorry to I think I have enough." The air seemed to grow heavier. The cashier frowned, shaking their head with visible frustration. At that moment, Henry gently set down his dish towel and stepped forward without anyone calling him. No fuss, no need for attention. He reached into his worn leather wallet, pulled out a few crumpled bills, and laid them on the counter, to the young mother's astonishment and deep gratitude. "It's all right. Save what you have for breakfast tomorrow for the little one," Henry said softly, his eyes warm and kind, free of judgment or hesitation. Michael instinctively tightened his grip around his coffee cup. Had he just used his own modest wages to help a stranger? And this wasn't the first time. Throughout his quiet observation, Michael had seen Henry do the same at least 3 times. For Henry, this was clearly more than just a job. It wasn't about a meager paycheck or simply passing the days. There was something deeper driving him, as if every time he helped someone, he was keeping a small ember of warmth alive in the winter of his life. But the saddest part was not everyone saw it that way. Michael overheard the bitter whispers of 2 employees standing nearby. "The old fool, acting like he's some kind of saint," one sneered. "Helping people like that? No one's going to thank him. He's just wasting his time," the other scoffed. Michael clenched his teeth, fighting back the surge of anger rising inside him. Why would he make such sacrifices? What drove a man in the twilight of his years to keep extending a hand to strangers, even as he battled his own hardships? Michael knew he had to find that answer. Not just for Henry, but for his own conscience. The conscience of a man who once dreamed of a Carter's diner filled with compassion, but had somehow, somewhere along the way, lost sight of that dream. And so Henry, the silent yet extraordinary old man, ignited within Michael a fire that could not be extinguished. A story far deeper than numbers on a report, an ordinary man, carrying the greatest lesson of all about human kindness. They say evil hides in plain sight, but what if the true villains are not strangers, but the very people you trusted behind the counter? As Michael sat quietly in the corner of the diner, hidden behind an old, worn-out newspaper, he thought the worst he might witness would be a little indifference or lack of dedication from his staff. But what he was about to overhear went far beyond anything he could have imagined. Troy and Megan, 2 names that once seemed like ordinary pieces in the well-oiled machine of Carter's diner, but turned out to be venomous snakes, slithering silently in the shadows. They saw Henry as a thorn in their side. To them, the diligent old dishwasher was an uncomfortable reminder of a goodness they could never possess and a moral standard they never wished to reach. Michael froze as he accidentally overheard their half-whispered conversation at the register. Troy smirked, speaking low, but clear enough for Michael to catch every word. "Patricia's started noticing the cash shortages during our shifts," he said, his tone casual but laced with cunning. "If we just help that shortfall grow a little more, She'll be convinced old Henry's been dipping into the till. Megan nodded slightly, a glint of cold malice in her eyes. Exactly. The old man's always hovering around the register, handing out cash to people who can't pay their bills. Who'd think he's putting money in? She let out a chilling laugh, sharp as ice. Michael felt something tighten in his chest. They were setting a trap for Henry, not by accident, not by misunderstanding, but through a deliberate, calculated scheme. They knew full well that the shift manager, Patricia, had been stressed over the mysterious losses lately, and they knew if they staged it carefully enough, when Patricia discovered the next discrepancy, all eyes of suspicion would turn to Henry, the old man always lingering near the register, yet whose true motives no one fully understood. Tomorrow's the day, Troy concluded with smug certainty. Patricia's doing the inventory audit. We just need to make sure Henry's right there when the numbers don't add up, and that's it. Megan smiled wickedly, satisfied with the cruelty of their plot. One final move, and we'll send the old man packing, she said, as though Henry's fate had already been sealed. Michael clenched his fists tightly beneath the table, his fingernails digging painfully into his palms. How could these two be so heartless? How could they laugh so easily while scheming to destroy an elderly man? A man who had given everything for his job and the sake of kindness, framing him to strip him of his dignity and his very livelihood? Viewers at this moment would no doubt feel the same surge of outrage. They would understand Michael's growing fury and feel an urgent desire to know, would he be able to gather enough evidence to expose this dirty scheme? Michael's gaze, after a brief moment of anger, hardened into sharp determination. He was no longer just a passive observer. Now, within his mind, a firm decision had been made. They thought he was just an ordinary customer. They had no idea that the storm they were brewing was about to sweep away everything they thought they had under control. Inside Michael, a quiet plan began to form. Not just to save Henry, but to remind everyone in this restaurant, once and for all, Carter's Diner is a place for people of heart, not a playground for opportunists. Some truths are hidden not by darkness, but by quiet dignity, until someone cares enough to see them. As night fell, Carter's Diner gradually emptied of its customers. The neon lights from outside the windows cast their glow over the empty tables, creating a space that felt both silent and somber. Michael remained seated like an ordinary customer, lingering a bit too long. But deep within his eyes, there burned an ever-growing determination. After Troy and Megan left the diner with their sly, crooked smiles, only Henry remained, still diligently tidying up the last of the plates. Michael waited. He wanted to know, once the restaurant door closed behind him, where would Henry go? A kind man like that surely must have a warm home waiting for him. But Michael's instincts told him the truth would not be so comforting. At last, Henry left the diner, his thin figure casting a shadow on the cold pavement beneath the dim streetlights. Michael kept a careful distance, his steps light, as if he too feared shattering the fragile stillness of the night. Henry didn't go far. He didn't turn onto the bustling main street, nor into any apartment or house. Instead, he made his way to the parking lot behind the diner, a place where only a few old, dust-covered cars sat forgotten. Then Henry stopped in front of a battered old Buick, its paint peeling, the doors rusted, and cracks running along its body like scars of time left unhealed. He let out a heavy sigh, as though the weight of the world pressed down on his frail shoulders. Carefully, Henry opened the back door of the car, not to retrieve anything, but to climb inside, curling up on the back seat beneath a threadbare blanket. Michael stood frozen. No, he thought, his eyes stinging. Could this truly be the place he called home? The night wind swept through, carrying a biting chill that made the image of Henry, huddled inside that cold vehicle, all the more heartbreaking. A lump of sorrow rose in Michael's throat, but he remained standing there, silently observing, to understand more deeply the man he had unknowingly overlooked in the cold lines of his business reports. The next morning, Michael decided to seek out a long-time regular of the diner, Mr. Ron, whom he had noticed always watching Henry with quiet respect. Through their conversation, layers of truth slowly unfolded, like a heavy velvet curtain finally drawn aside. They used to have a lovely little home over on Maple Street, Ron began, his voice heavy with sorrow. But Martha, Henry's wife, was struck by that terrible cancer. Henry sold everything, the house, the car, even their retirement savings, just to pay for her treatments. Michael was stunned. He even sold their wedding rings, Ron continued, his gaze distant. Because he said the most important thing was having just a little more time with her. Even one more day was priceless. And when Michael asked about the daughter Henry had never mentioned at work, Ron simply sighed. Her name's Sarah. She lives in Seattle, Ron explained. Henry didn't want her to worry. He kept sending her photos from the diner, telling her everything was fine, even made up a story that he was the shift manager just so she could focus on building her new life. Michael felt as though every word was cutting deep into his heart. A father willing to bear all the loneliness, the cold, and the pain just to preserve his daughter's peaceful dreams. Henry, that quiet man, had sacrificed not only for his lost love, but also for the sacred duty of a father. He lived so entirely for others that he had forgotten himself. At that moment, I believe anyone following this story would fall silent. No one could hold back their tears in the face of Henry's quiet, noble, and deeply lonely sacrifice. And in Michael's eyes now, there wasn't just sorrow, there was an awakening. A silent vow rose within his heart. Henry would no longer be alone. He would no longer have to endure injustice in silence. Michael knew what he had to do. Sometimes, to expose the rot, you must set the perfect stage for it to reveal itself. After a restless night, the morning light brought not just a new dawn, but also ignited within Michael Carter a sharper resolve than ever before. He was no longer a silent observer. Now, he was a player, and he would play this game with all the skill of a man who had once built an empire from nothing. Michael knew well. To unmask the guilty, he had to catch them red-handed. And more than anyone, he understood that people like Troy and Megan only revealed their true selves when lured by their overconfidence. So he reached out to Jessica Miller, a single mother genuinely struggling to make ends meet. Jessica was a familiar face at the diner, but few knew she was juggling 2 jobs to support her young daughter, Lily. When Michael approached her and explained the situation, Jessica tearfully agreed to help, not just for the support he promised to give her daughter, but more deeply, because she herself had once been quietly helped by Henry. That day, the air inside the diner felt heavy, almost thick enough to touch. Michael returned in his familiar, modest attire, taking his place in the discreet corner of the restaurant. Everything had been carefully planned. The timing, the players, and the watchful eyes in the room. He only needed to wait for the trap to spring. Jessica entered the diner, holding her little girl's hand. Both were dressed in clean but worn clothes, Jessica's shoulders patched with clumsy stitches. Lily, around 5 years old, clung tightly to her mother's hand, her innocent eyes curiously scanning the room. Troy glanced over from the register, his gaze flashing with disdain. Megan greeted them with a fake plastic smile as she handed them the menu. Jessica ordered the simplest meal, Just a grilled cheese for the little one and a small bowl of soup for me." Throughout the meal, Michael could see Jessica trying to maintain a calm facade, but when she opened her wallet to pay, her expression suddenly fell, a genuine, heart-wrenching moment of embarrassment. I'm sorry," she said softly, her eyes brimming with tears. "I thought I had enough. My bank card is frozen." Lily looked up at her mother, her innocent gaze tinged with worry. Michael felt his heart tighten in his chest. Megan, just as expected, seized the opportunity. She raised an eyebrow, her voice cold as steel. "Sorry, ma'am, we can't serve meals for free." Jessica's voice trembled. "Please, can I wash dishes or clean up to make up for it?" Troy chimed in with a mocking laugh. "We already have someone for that." Their eyes, full of scorn, turned toward Henry, who was standing nearby. And, just as Michael had anticipated, Henry stepped forward without a moment's hesitation. "I'll take care of it," Henry said, his voice warm yet resolute. He pulled a few crumpled bills from his old jacket pocket, handing them to Megan, unfazed by the sneers from her and Troy. Jessica's eyes filled with gratitude as she softly thanked him, clutching Lily's hand tightly as they quietly left the diner. Michael saw Megan turn to Troy, whispering with glee, "Perfect. One more piece of evidence against the old man." Michael kept his composure. His heart pounded in his chest, but outwardly, he remained the picture of indifference, like any unsuspecting customer. He knew Troy and Megan were tightening the noose around their own necks, bit by bit, without even realizing it. Viewers at this moment would surely be holding their breath, watching every tiny detail unfold. The trap was almost closed, waiting for that final blow. Patricia, the shift manager, stepped out from the back office after finishing the morning's books. Right on cue, Megan shot Troy a meaningful glance and began playing the perfect victim. "Patricia," she called out loudly, making sure everyone could hear, "I think we've got another cash shortage in the till." And just like that, their carefully staged performance was complete. But what Troy and Megan didn't know was this. They were actually the lead actors in a much bigger play, directed by none other than Michael Carter himself. There's a moment when lies collapse under the weight of the truth. The room seemed to hold its breath. Henry stood, motionless, caught in the circle of scrutinizing eyes, his shoulders slightly hunched under the crushing weight of false accusations that bore down on his already weary frame. Patricia, the shift manager, clutched the inventory report tightly, her voice trembling. "Henry, I'm afraid you'll have to hand over your duties." The atmosphere in the diner thickened to the point of suffocation. Troy and Megan stood behind her, unable to hide their smug, victorious smiles, as if they had just snuffed out the last flicker of light in Henry's life. But just when all hope seemed drained away, a voice rang out, warm yet commanding with undeniable authority. "Hold on." Every head in the diner turned. The man who had been sitting quietly in the far corner stepped out from the shadows. Slowly he removed his worn cap, revealing a face that everyone instantly recognized. Patricia gasped, "Mr. Carter, Michael Carter." Murmurs rippled through the diner, customers whispering, staff frozen in shock. Troy and Megan's faces drained of color, as if they had just been judged by their own guilty consciences. Michael stood tall, his sharp gaze sweeping over the deceitful pair. "There's no need for that report, Patricia," he said, his tone calm but razor-sharp. "I'll handle this personally." He pulled a small device from his pocket and walked over to the television mounted on the wall. With a few quick taps, the screen lit up, displaying crystal-clear footage. "Let me show you all what nearly destroyed A good, honest man, Michael declared, his eyes landing on Henry, who still stood there, stunned, not understanding what was happening. The video played, Troy slyly stuffing cash into his pocket while fiddling with the register. Megan deliberately voiding transactions, their voices loud and unmistakable. "Keep it up, and we'll pin it all on the old man," Troy sneered triumphantly. "Hurry up! I can't stand watching Henry get praised anymore." Megan spat bitterly. Gasps filled the diner. Customers' eyes widened in disbelief, some covering their mouths in shock. Patricia stood frozen, speechless. Then the footage shifted. Henry quietly pulling money from his own pocket to cover shortfalls for struggling customers, his acts of kindness laid bare for all to see. A regular customer whispered, "My God, Henry's always been the one helping people." Megan burst into tears, mascara streaking her pale, panic-stricken face. Troy jerked toward the door in a desperate attempt to flee, but two burly customers, men Henry had once helped, blocked his path, their expressions cold and unyielding. Not so fast. At that very moment, the police arrived. Michael had called them earlier, already armed with the evidence. "You're right on time," Michael said coolly. "These are the people you're looking for." Troy struggled weakly as they cuffed him, still shouting, "I was set up. You don't understand." Megan sobbed, pleading, "Please don't take me. I was just following his lead." But justice had spoken. The police led the two culprits out of the diner before the eyes of every customer and employee. Applause erupted, crashing over the room like a wave breaking through all the lies. Henry, the quiet man who had stood silently throughout it all, now had tears welling in his eyes, overwhelmed as he realized that all the goodness he had given so selflessly was finally being seen and honored. Michael stepped forward, looking Henry straight in the eye, his voice filled with genuine sincerity. "Henry, I owe you an apology. But more than that, I owe you my deepest gratitude." The air in the diner had yet to settle after the dramatic unveiling. All eyes remained fixed on the elderly man, the one who had just escaped the filthy net spun by those cruel-hearted schemers. Henry stood there, bewildered, his calloused hands still clutching the old rag. His eyes, red from emotion, shimmered with a quiet pride. His kindness had finally been seen. Michael Carter stepped toward him, no longer the cold CEO from multi-million-dollar boardrooms, but simply a man bowing his head in respect for the nobility of compassion. He gripped Henry's shoulder firmly, his voice warm, yet resonating through the silent room. "Henry, everything you've done, I've seen it clearer than ever. You haven't just been washing dishes. You've been scrubbing away the ugliness I unknowingly allowed to fester in this very restaurant." Applause broke out among the customers. Some moved to the point of tears. Michael motioned to Patricia, the shift manager, still reeling from the guilt of not recognizing what had been happening under her nose. From the office, Patricia brought out a folder and placed it gently in front of Henry. "Henry Lawson," Michael declared, his voice firm yet filled with pride, "from today on, you will no longer stand behind the dish pit." Henry blinked in astonishment, not yet able to grasp what was happening. "I am appointing you as the Chief Operating Officer of the entire Carter's Diner chain, effective immediately," Michael continued, a bright smile glimmering at the corners of his eyes. "A fair salary, full benefits, and most importantly, the respect of every single person here." The diner erupted in thunderous applause, but Michael wasn't finished yet. He pulled out another set of documents from his pocket and handed them to Henry, his gaze sincere. "And this is the key to a new beginning. I've paid off every penny of your and your wife's medical debt. The little house just down the street from this diner. It's yours, fully owned." Henry trembled, tears he could no longer hold back streaming down his cheeks. He opened the folder, seeing his name printed clearly on the deed. "You've spent your entire life giving to others," Michael continued, his voice thick with emotion. "And today let us give back to you just a fraction of what you truly deserve." The crowd around them all rose to their feet, applause filling the room once more, as loyal patrons, employees, and even first-time visitors found themselves overwhelmed by emotion. Amy, the single mother Henry had once helped, stepped forward, carrying her daughter in her arms. "Henry," she said, her voice choked with gratitude, "you were there for my family when we had nothing. Today we want to give something back." Michael smiled, raising his hand gently. "Amy and everyone here," he said, "Henry's needs are already taken care of. But I have a better idea. Let's create the Henry Lawson Fund to help others, just as Henry has helped so many." The room erupted in joyous cheers, faces lit up with hope. A wave of warmth swept through the space, touching every heart in the room, and no doubt, every heart watching this story unfold. Henry wept, but not tears of sorrow. These were the ears of a man who had spent a lifetime giving quietly, now finally embraced by a community overflowing with gratitude. I don't know what to say," Henry choked out. "Just thank you. Thank you all, from the bottom of my heart." And Michael, turning toward his employees and customers, declared with conviction, "From this day forward, Carter's Diner will be more than just a place to eat. We will be a place that spreads kindness, humanity, and justice. A place where no one ever has to choose between compassion and a meal on their table." The next day, Carter's Diner opened its doors as usual, but the atmosphere inside had completely transformed. What was once just a simple stopover now radiated with new life. It wasn't just the banners celebrating Henry that hung proudly from the walls. It was something deeper. Trust had been restored, and the spirit of humanity had been reignited. Henry stepped inside, no longer the man toiling away behind the dish pit. He wore a crisp new shirt, collar neatly pressed, and a shining name tag that read, "Henry Lawson, manager of Carter's Diner." But beyond the title, it was the genuine respect in everyone's eyes that was his true glory. Customers applauded warmly as Henry passed by. Amy, the single mother, wiped away tears as she spoke softly to her son. "Son, that's Mr. Henry, the man who helped Mummy when we had no one else to turn to." The diner felt like a festival that day. People came not just to eat, but to be part of something greater, to be part of this beautiful story. Michael Carter was there too, but this time no longer as the undercover owner. He stepped onto a small platform, his gaze sweeping across the crowd, his voice strong yet full of emotion. "We've learned an important lesson," he said, "that in any business, true value isn't found in numbers on a financial report. It's found in every single person who makes it what it is." He turned to Henry, admiration shining in his eyes, and Henry is the living proof of that. Applause thundered like a storm across the room. But Michael wasn't done yet. He made a special announcement. "I hereby establish the Henry Lawson Fund. Each month, this fund will take a portion of our restaurant's revenue to support workers who are struggling, just as Henry quietly supported so many over the years." Henry's eyes welled up with tears. He had never imagined that his quiet acts of kindness would grow into something so vast. I just wanted to help a little," he stammered, but Michael laughed heartily. "Henry, you did far more than a little. You changed all of us." And then, the true miracle unfolded. In the days that followed, waves of goodwill swept across the community. Customers from all around came not just to dine, but to contribute to the Henry Lawson Fund. Other Carter's Diner locations began adopting the same model, spreading kindness far and wide. People whom Henry had once helped now returned, not to receive, but to give. And Henry himself, the man who had once quietly washed dishes in the back corner, now stood as an inspiration to the entire community. Sometimes, he said at the opening ceremony of the fund, we think we're too small to make a difference. But if you just start with one act of kindness, the world around you will begin to change. The closing moment is filled with emotion. The camera zooms in on Henry's warm, heartfelt smile, surrounded by hopeful faces of customers and staff alike. Behind him, a newly hung sign reads, Carter's Diner, where kindness is always on the menu. Michael and Henry shook hands firmly as the crowd erupted in joyful applause. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to hit like and share this video to spread the message of love. Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Every word you share is an act of inspiration. And don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss more soul-stirring stories like this.